Everybody, peace. Welcome to the Started by the College Football Show. Wherever or however you're listening, we are so grateful to have you here with us. As you guys know, I'm your host, Casuan Cottle, and we've got a wonderful show for you today, guys. Obviously, we are going to be recapping the newest rankings from the College Football Playoff Committee, what that means for the race to the playoff, and what each team should be expecting and looking forward to as the season goes along. And obviously you guys are reading the tagline right now, and you guys read the title of the video. Is the SEC being shown lack of favor from the College Football Playoff Committee? And I think they are. And we're going to discuss all of it. But before we get into it, guys, if you haven't already, be sure to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button as well, so you guys can stay updated on all of our latest content that we post daily. And if you'd like to support our network and our company, you can do so by following the link in the ticker below. It's streamelements.com/startedbydtheshow/tip. Once again, it's streamelements.com/startedbydtheshow/tip. None of this is possible as you guys are fans. We're so grateful for all the love and support that you show us. So, that being said, let's go get right into it. As I was saying, guys, is the SEC, specifically Georgia and Alabama, being shown unfair treatment from the College Football Playoff Committee? And I think they are. And I say that because last week we talked about how Ohio State doesn't really have a particularly great win on their resume. We talked about how they played Notre Dame on the road and defeated them. But however, if we look at where Notre Dame is at right now, Notre Dame starts to look less and less impressive, particularly after what happened to them against Louisville and this past weekend against Clemson. And quite frankly, I'm so surprised that Notre Dame is still in the top 25 rankings. I know they have a good win against USC, but we see that USC isn't even in the top 25 rankings anymore. So what does that really mean? And so if Notre Dame is one of your biggest wins to go along with Penn State, and we know that both of those teams are pretty much the same. Both have great, talking about Notre Dame and Penn State, both teams have a pretty solid defense. Both teams struggle offensively, and both teams struggle against teams ranked inside of the top 10 or even in the top 5. And they never show up in those big moments, those big game moments. So if Notre Dame and Penn State are your biggest wins as Ohio State, what does that really say about you? It doesn't particularly say much, because even when you played Notre Dame, it was a close game. You only won by one possession. And then if you see how they performed against Penn State, it was a low-scoring affair as well. So what does that performance really mean if you're Ohio State? And we saw how they struggled last week against Rutgers in the first half, an unranked team at that, and the committee still chose to keep Ohio State number one. If we look at Georgia's coming off a dominant victory over Missouri. And before that, they had a dominant victory against Florida. So Georgia is starting to show the committee that they are the best team in college football. People question their offensive capabilities, but over the past 2 weeks, Georgia's averaging over 34 points a game. I know it's against Missouri and Florida, teams who have both struggled defensively. But however, Georgia is now showing you that they are shoring up their deficiencies, and they're starting to peak at the right time. So now the question becomes, what is it going to take for Georgia to surpass Ohio State as number one in the rankings? They got a matchup against Ole Miss this weekend, and that should be a particularly interesting matchup. We're going to preview that tomorrow on our preview show. But if the rankings, the College Football Playoff Committee is meant to be impartial, unbiased, and its parameters are using the eye test, strength of record, and those sort of parameters, then Georgia passes both of those parameters, specifically compared to Ohio State. If we look at the eye test, I don't think anyone would argue that Ohio State's better than Georgia. That doesn't. No one thinks that, and no one would argue that Georgia has the better strength of schedule so far than Ohio State. And I know it's early. I know it's only the second week of the rankings, but what we have noticed is that patterns and precedent is set from the onset, from the first initial ranking. Each year that the College Football Playoff Committee has been implemented, They have followed the same guidelines. They have followed the same patterns each year to year. And it's unfortunate because it seems like from year to year the focus changes. It seems like one year the focus is more on your strength of schedule. Then the next year your focus is more on the eye test. If the goal is to get the 4 best teams into the college football playoff, then that's what it has to. I don't care if you're similar to last year where Alabama had 2 losses and didn't play in the SEC championship game, but I don't think no one would argue that Alabama was not one of the 4 best teams last year in college football. And so that's what the college football playoff committee has to remember. I think that's what they forget sometimes. And there's also a bit of voter fatigue as well. That because the SEC because the college football playoff committee is human, and they just like all of us can be partial to fatigue and human tendencies and mistakes, quote unquote. You get voter fatigue. You get tired of seeing the same team over and over and over again, similar to how to Michael Jordan in the late 80s, all the way throughout the 90s. You can argue that Michael Jordan should have been every MVP every year, aside the year he retired. And the college football playoff committee is the same way. You can argue that you get tired. They get tired of seeing SEC, the Alabama and Georgia in the college football playoff every year, and so they start to become less and less partial towards those teams. And it's unfortunate, but that is sometimes a side effect of success. And you notice it because even dating back to last year, the college football playoff committee was so hesitant of putting Alabama in the top 4 at the end of the season, but we saw what happened when they played Kansas State. It became pretty apparent that Alabama should have been in the college football playoff last year. And it looks like that same trend is starting to carry over into this year. I'm not saying Alabama should be ranked ahead of Florida State or even Washington, because both those teams are undefeated and they're deserving of the rankings where they're at. But if you ask me, based on what I've seen, I think Alabama is the best one-loss team in the country right now, because we look at Oregon's schedule. They don't have a win against a team with a winning record except against Utah. That's their only win. Oregon's only win against a team with a winning record is against Utah. And if you look at Texas, Texas is starting to struggle over the last couple of games. They almost lost to K-State last week, and then they and obviously they have that loss against Oklahoma. But we saw Oklahoma did to Kansas. They lost to Kansas, so that loss starts to look worse as well. And if we look at the eye test right now, talking about right now, we're not talking about earlier in the season, we're talking about right now, who looks better on tape, Alabama or Texas? And I think everyone would agree that Alabama looks better on paper right now and on tape compared to Texas. And what's going to happen with this, though, the reason that the college football playoff committee is leaving the rankings like this is because they don't want to have the option of having 2 SEC teams in the college football playoff. And it's unfortunate now, because now it looks like Alabama might not control their own destiny. Because last week I was saying that, okay, if Alabama wins out, then they'll be able to secure the spot in the college football playoff. But now, what it's looking like now, because if Texas wins out, will they still be ahead of Alabama? And now you start to have questions for Alabama. Well, do you really still control your own destiny, or do you need a couple other teams to lose? I still think that you can't leave a one-loss SEC champion out of the college football playoff. I just don't think that's possible. But now what happens is if Georgia loses to Alabama in the SEC championship game, they'll all but drop out of the top 4. And I get it. I know why the college football playoff committee is doing this, because they're shifting the rankings like this because they don't want to have the possibility of 2 SEC teams or 2 Pac-12 teams in the college football playoff come January. So I understand why they're doing this. Don't agree with it, but I see what they're doing because they did this before or the previous seasons. So it's no surprise to me that this is happening. And what we have to understand is that a lot of this is about optics, and a lot of this is about fan turnout as well. Fans start to, especially casual fans, start to get tired of seeing the same teams over and over and over again, particularly from the SEC. So, if we keep the ratings up, then they try to shift, they try to mix it up, and try to get diversity, quote unquote, within the college football playoff, and try to get different teams in there. And so this is their way of doing that by not keeping to the most dynamic and dominant teams over the past decade in Alabama and Georgia. Is their way of keeping them outside of the college football playoff. But these things tend to have a way of working themselves out. Based on what I've seen so far of my years of watching college football, I can guarantee you, from Michigan, Florida State, and Washington, not at least 2 out of the 3 of those teams will finish with 1 loss. There's no possible way that Michigan, Florida State, and Washington all end up undefeated. That's just not going to happen. So when that happens, I think that will open up the door for Alabama to get into the college football playoff. But those are my biggest takeaways. That's the first thing that popped up to me from looking at the initial rankings for the college football playoff. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section. I'd love to hear all about it. What are your guys' thoughts? What have you guys seen? And is the SEC, specifically Alabama and Georgia, getting fair treatment from the College Football Playoff Committee? Let me know what you guys think. Leave your thoughts in the chat room, in the comment section. I'd love to hear all about it. And in our next segment, guys, I'm going to be discussing the biggest surprise, biggest thing that stood out to me from the newest rankings from the College Football Playoff Committee. So be sure to stick around for that, guys. You're not going to miss it. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. In case you missed the first segment of our show, we just discussed the recent rankings that came out by the College Football Playoff Committee, and I discussed why I feel like the SEC is being shown unfair treatment, particularly in the case of Alabama and Georgia. But I understand it's more of from political, not political, it's more from a financial standpoint, and I get it. I know why the rankings are the way they are. It's because the committee doesn't want two SEC teams in the college football playoff, and they're going to do whatever they can to do that, to prevent that from happening. But I said it because I've seen it before. It's happened many times. You just have to know what you're looking for. But in this segment, guys, we're going to be discussing my biggest surprise, my biggest takeaway. So, this segment won't be too long. And I was questioning whether I even want to do this or not, because we were so intentional about what we did in our earlier segment. But I think it's necessary. I think it's necessary to do this. So, my biggest surprise, biggest takeaway from this newest ranking from the College Football Playoff Committee, the biggest surprise, no doubt, is that Notre Dame is still ranked in the top 25. And particularly that Arizona is still ranked behind Notre Dame. And you guys know how I feel about. Listen, I know that we've had people comment right in that we're hard on Notre Dame and we don't give them fair treatment. Listen, I just call it how I see it. Notre Dame is constantly overrated, and especially early on in the season, they're given too high of a ranking, so they create an unrealistic standard for them. And when they lose, they always get the same backlash. Man, they always seem to fail, and they always seem to not perform in the biggest moments. So these high rankings and high expectations are actually to the detriment of Notre Dame. We have to slot Notre Dame where appropriately. They're not a top 10 team. They're definitely not a top 5 team. They're a lower tier team in the top 25. They're 20 at the highest and lowest 25 when the preseason rankings come in. Because we see that they can't perform well, and they don't perform well against the top tier teams, the Alabamas, the Georgias, the Clemsons, the Ohio States, the Michigans. They're not on that tier. And if we continue to slate them in that tier, we start to think they are, but then they start to not meet our expectations, and then that's where you start to get a disconnect. But it's okay. They're not there, and that's fine. It's a matter of accepting that. And listen, they struggled against Duke. They lost to Ohio State. They lost to Louisville dominantly. They have a good win against Clemson, against USC, which the USC isn't even ranked in the top 25 anymore. So what does that win really mean for them? This is a team that struggled offensively throughout the season, and defensively that's their bright spot. But we saw what Clemson did, and Clemson is a team that has struggled to put up offense, put up points throughout the season. So what does that mean? And they lost at that. So that's why I'm not sold on Notre Dame. I'm surprised Notre Dame is still ranked in the top 25. I don't think they should be. Once again, it's partiality, and that's what happens when you get humans as opposed to to a system. But definitely Notre Dame still being ranked in the top 25 is the biggest surprise to me. I just don't understand how that is. Well, I understand how it is, but it's a representation, like I said, of the bias that is in play for college football. But let me know what you guys think. What has been the biggest surprise? What is the biggest surprise in your guys' opinion from the newest rankings from the College Football Playoff Committee? Leave your thoughts in the comment section. I'd love to hear all about it. But with that being said, guys, that's it for our show for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's been a wonderful show. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button as well, so you guys can stay up to date on all our latest content that we post daily. And if you would like to support our network and our company, you can do so by following the link in the ticker below. It's streamelements.com/starterbodyShow/tip. Once again, it's streamelements.com/starterbodyShow/tip. None of this is possible without you guys as fans, so we're so grateful and honored for all the love and support that you show us. And Be sure to follow us on Patreon as well. You can do so by going to patreon.com, clicking on the search bar, and typing in "Sorry to Bother You" show. That way you can get access to all of our exclusive content that we post daily. And that being said, guys, we'll be back again same time tomorrow, 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So until then, guys, continue to stay safe, be vigilant, make smart decisions, and